The Iridian aliens guffawed as their battle fleet of 500 warships approached the derelict human fleet, right until the warship engines exploded to life and plasma ruptured from human cannons. Supreme Commander Altair ran his scaled hands over the control panel. The lizard-like alien licked his snout as he eyed the cluster of 30 abandoned Terran ships. Scorch marks lacerated the hulls, and many had hull breaches from the battle that vanquished the Empire. Now they were space trash. "Fire a warning shot," Altair barked at the gunner. A plasma bolt vomited out and narrowly missed the pitted hull of the Tess Retribution. Suddenly lights flickered on, bathing the graveyard in a ghostly glow. A bass rumble and engine vibration shook the vacuum of space as the human battleships groaned to life. Captain Brian Simpson, a grizzled veteran with a glowing cybernetic eye, sat in the captain's chair of the Retribution bridge. He watched the Iridian fleet arrange into attack formation on the view screen. "Divert all power to engines and shields," Simpson ordered. "Ready the phase cannons and tell the fleet to prepare for battle. We will make them pay for what they did to Terra." His crew rushed to comply, charging weapons, raising shields, and angling armor. This ragtag group of misfits were the final survivors of the Empire, and a burning need for revenge flowed in their veins. The small human fleet was the prey, hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned by the approaching aliens. But they did have one ace up their torn sleeves, a prototype weapon that could penetrate Iridian shields. Plasma bolts and antimatter missiles crisscrossed the vacuum as Altair's fleet opened fire on the human vessels. The Retribution and its escorts returned fire, lighting up the night with their own barrage. Cannons spewed plasma and torpedoes spun towards their targets. On the Retribution's bridge, Simpson watched the Tez Dauntless peel off from the pack. The sleek destroyer darted through the Iridian formation, absorbing fire meant for the Retribution. Its captain, Marcus Reeves, had a reputation for pulling off crazy stunts that somehow worked. "Torpedo bays 1 through 4, lock onto that cruiser. Fire!" Reeves yelled. 4 EMP torpedoes shot out from the Dauntless, leaving crackling blue trails in their wake. They slammed into the cruiser's hull and detonated, sending an electromagnetic pulse rippling across its surface. The lights on the cruiser flickered and died as its shields and weapons went offline. "Hit it with everything we've got," Reeves ordered. The Dauntless unleashed a storm of kinetic rounds, punching through the cruiser's unprotected hull. Explosions blossomed across its surface until it finally erupted in a blinding flash, scattering debris in all directions. Across the battlefield, the Tees Valiant accelerated towards an Iridian dreadnought, its reinforced prow aimed at the larger ship's midsection. Commander Elena Sato gripped the armrests of her chair as the distance closed rapidly. "Brace for impact," she shouted over the intercom. The Valiant shuddered as it collided with the dreadnought, its prow piercing the enemy ship's shields like a spear. Metal screamed and sparks flew as the two ships ground against each other. "Breaching pods away," Sato barked. A dozen pods launched from the Valiant's hull, latching onto the dreadnought like ticks. Their hatches blew open and 50 Marines poured out, pulse rifles and plasma grenades at the ready. They charged through the corridors, boots pounding on metal decks as they fought their way towards the bridge. Private Jenkins took a plasma bolt to the chest and went down screaming. His squadmate stepped over his body and kept moving, returning fire with their pulse rifles. Iridian crew members fell left and right, their scaly hides no match for the Marines' armor-piercing rounds. On the Retribution's bridge, Simpson watched the charge meter on the phase cannon creep towards 100%. The charge meter hit 93%. Simpson leaned forward, his cybernetic eye zooming in on the distant shapes of the Iridian ships. Suddenly, his console beeped with an incoming transmission from the TES Defiant. Captain Singh's face appeared on the screen, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Captain Simpson, I'm launching our fighter squadron to assist in the battle," Singh said. "They're led by Lieutenant Jack Thompson, callsign Maverick. He's the best pilot we've got." In the hangar bay of the Defiant, Thompson climbed into the cockpit of his sleek fighter, the Phantom-class interceptor. He pulled on his helmet and activated the ship's systems, the displays coming to life around him. His squadron, consisting of 12 fighters, launched from the Defiant, streaking out into the chaos of the battle. "All right, Ghosts, let's show these lizards what human pilots can do," Thompson said over the comm. "Engage stealth mode and follow my lead." The fighters activated their advanced stealth technology, their shapes shimmering and vanishing against the starry backdrop. They darted through the battle, weaving between the larger ships and engaging the Iridian interceptors in high-speed dogfights. Thompson rolled his fighter, narrowly avoiding a plasma bolt, and fired his own weapons, vaporizing an enemy ship. "Ghosts, form up on me," Thompson ordered. "We're making a run on their capital ships." The fighters regrouped and flew in formation, their stealth mode allowing them to slip past the Iridian defenses. They targeted the shield generators and weapon systems of the massive Iridian dreadnoughts, strafing the ships with precision strikes. On the bridge of the Retribution, Simpson's console beeped again, this time with an urgent message from the TES Resolute. Dr. Liam Connors appeared on the screen, his face etched with excitement. "Captain Simpson, we've made a breakthrough," Connors said. "We've discovered a weakness in the Iridian shields, a narrow frequency band that can cause feedback loops and overload their systems." Simpson leaned forward. "Can we exploit it?" Connors nodded. "Yes, but we need to get this information to the rest of the fleet. The Resolute is cut off on the other side of the Iridian formation." Simpson made a split-second decision. "We'll come to you. The Retribution will punch a hole through their lines." He turned to his crew. "Helmsman, plot a course directly through the Iridian fleet. Divert all power to engines and forward shields." "Come on, old girl, hold together," Simpson muttered, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. The phase cannon's charge meter ticked up to 98%. Simpson could only hope that it would be enough, that the Resolute's discovery and the bravery of his crew would turn the tide of this desperate battle. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and failure was not an option. The Retribution shook violently as it ploughed through the Iridian blockade, its hull scorched and dented from the onslaught. In engineering, Lieutenant Commander Caleb Russo wiped sweat from his brow as a console next to him burst into flames. Sparks sprayed his face, and smoke filled the air. "Reroute power from life support on decks 3 through 7 to the forward shields," Russo yelled over the chaos. His fingers flew across the controls, rapidly altering power flows. The ship shuddered again as an antimatter missile detonated against the weakening shields. In the armory, Sergeant Major Lucas Bull Hansen grabbed a pulse rifle and slapped a magazine into the well. "You heard 'em, boys. Time to welcome our scaly guests." His squad of Marines locked and loaded, priming grenades. Boots thudding on metal, Bull led the charge towards the invaders. They stacked up on either side of a sealed bulkhead, the edges glowing molten from a breach charge. With a nod, Bull hit the door release. It slid open, revealing a squad of Iridian shock troops led by Commander Zaxxon. The two sides opened fire, pulse rounds and plasma bolts crisscrossing the air. 2 Marines went down instantly, their chests smoking. Bull dove into cover behind a crate and blind fired over the top, spraying the lizard-like aliens with suppressive fire. "Frag out," he shouted, pulling the pin on a plasma grenade. He counted to 3 and rolled it through the doorway. The explosion shook the corridor, painting the walls with green blood and charred scales. Outside the ship, Lieutenant Jack Thompson gritted his teeth as a plasma bolt sizzled past his cockpit, nearly clipping his wing. "Drone swarm inbound, Ghosts! Evasive maneuvers!" A cloud of small nimble drones poured from the Iridian carriers, their blasters glowing with charge. Thompson jinked and weaved, trying to shake the drones on his tail. His wingman wasn't so lucky. The man's fighter vanished in a fireball as a dozen drones peppered it with plasma fire. "Maverick, we can't keep this up," Thompson's squadron leader yelled through the comm. "We have to—" He yanked his flight stick into a hard turn, aiming straight for the massive dreadnought at the heart of the Iridian formation. Alarms blared as the flagship's point defenses locked onto him. Thompson went full throttle, plasma bolts filling his vision. On the Retribution's bridge, Simpson braced himself against his chair as another barrage slammed into the shields. Status report. Shields at 13%, Captain, the tactical officer reported. We're almost through their line, but I don't know how much longer we can hold out. Simpson keyed the comm. Dr. Connors, we're approaching your position. Transmit the shield frequency data now. Static crackled in response. Then a blinding flash lit up the view screen as a massive explosion consumed the Resolute. Debris pinwheeled through space, peppering the Retribution's hull. The Resolute? Simpson breathed, his cybernetic eye reflecting the fading light of the blast. Dr. Connors. The bridge went silent, the crew staring in shock at the twisted wreckage that had once been their last hope. Simpson's hands curled into fists, his nails digging into his palms. The fate of humanity had just taken a dire turn, and the battle was... Simpson's cybernetic eye glinted with fury as he stared at the wreckage of the Resolute on the view screen. His fists clenched, fingernails digging into his palms, he slammed his fist on the armrest. Tactical! Analysis! The tactical officer's hands flew over her console. Sir, sensors indicate multiple Iridian boarding pods attached to the Resolute's hull before the explosion. They must have slipped through our defenses. Damn it! Simpson growled. The bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, assessing the damage and trying to piece together what had happened. Suddenly a garbled transmission crackled through the comm system. Captain Simpson, Dr. Connors here, managed to... partial schematic, shield weakness. The transmission dissolved into static. Simpson leaned forward, his heart pounding. Dr. Connors, come in! But there was no response, only the hiss of dead air. Simpson clenched his jaw. They had been so close. He turned to his comm officer. Get that data analyzed immediately. We need to know what Connors found. Simpson then opened a channel to the hangar bay. Hangar bay, this is the captain. Prepare a rescue team to search for survivors on the Resolute. We're not leaving anyone behind. Down in the hangar, Ensign Noah Kenji was already suiting up, his exosuit whirring to life as he stepped into it. The sleek black armor encased his body, augmenting his strength and speed. He grabbed a pulse rifle and checked the charge. Kenji, the deck chief called out, you're leading the rescue mission. Pick your team and get ready to launch. Kenji nodded, adrenaline already pumping through his veins. He pointed to 3 Marines, each encased in their own exosuits. Sanchez, Ramirez, Ivanov, you're with me. Let's go. The 4 of them climbed into a shuttle, the hatch sealing behind them. Kenji took the controls, his hands steady on the flight stick. Rescue 1 to bridge. We'll go for launch. Acknowledged, Rescue 1, Simpson replied. Bring our people home. The shuttle blasted out of the hangar, weaving through the debris field towards the stricken Resolute. Chunks of metal and shattered glass bounced off the shuttle's shields as Kenji navigated the wreckage. There, Sanchez called out, pointing to a gaping hole in the Resolute's hull. That's our entry point. Kenji brought the shuttle in close, magnetic clamps locking onto the Resolute's hull. The hatch hissed open, and the 4 Marines leaped out, their boots clanging on the deck. They activated their helmet lights, the beams cutting through the smoke and darkness. Life signs detected, Ivanov said, consulting his wrist scanner. 50 meters ahead. They moved forward cautiously, pulse rifles at the ready. The corridors were strewn with debris and the bodies of fallen crew members. Kenji swallowed hard, trying not to look too closely at their faces. As they rounded a corner, they came upon a group of survivors huddled together. Among them was a woman with short, dark hair, her face smudged with soot and blood. She looked up as the Marines approached. Dr. Amelia Novak, she said, her voice hoarse. Thank God you found us. Kenji helped her to her feet, noting the way she winced and held her side. Are you injured, Doctor? I'll live, she replied, gritting her teeth. But we need to get back to the Retribution. I have to help analyze the data Connors sent. Kenji nodded, already guiding her and the other survivors back towards the shuttle. We'll get you there. Let's move. As the rescue team made their way back to the Retribution, Rousseau and his engineers huddled around a console. trying to make sense of the partial schematic. The data was incomplete, fragmented, but it was a start. On the bridge, Simpson watched the tactical display, his mind racing. The Iridian fleet was regrouping, preparing for another attack. They were running out of time. Simpson's cybernetic eye glowed as he made his choice. He opened a comm channel to the entire ship. "All hands, this is the captain. I know we've taken heavy losses. I know the odds are against us. But we have a chance, here and now, to strike a blow against the Iridians that they'll never forget. We have a chance to turn the tide of this war. And I say we take it. So man your stations, charge your weapons, and prepare to engage the enemy. We're not backing down, not this time. This is our moment. This is our fight." A cheer went up from the crew as Simpson's words echoed through the ship. They knew the risks, knew the price they might pay. But they also knew what was at stake. The Retribution turned to face the oncoming Iridian fleet, its battered hull gleaming in the starlight. The phase cannon hummed with power, ready to unleash its fury. Fighters launched from the hangar bay, forming up around the larger ships. On the bridge, Simpson settled into his chair, his gaze fixed on the viewscreen. The Iridian ships loomed before them, a wall of metal and plasma. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. "This is it," he murmured, "no turning back now." He leaned forward, his finger hovering over the firing control. The Iridians were closing fast, their weapons charging. Simpson's heart pounded in his ears, his breath caught in his throat. He gave the order, his voice ringing out across the bridge. "All ships, open fire!" And with that, the battle was joined once more. A furious clash of metal and fire, a desperate struggle for survival and victory. The fate of the galaxy would be decided here, in the cold depths of space, by the courage and determination of a handful of human warriors, fighting against all odds, refusing to surrender, refusing to... Simpson's jaw tightened as he made the call. "All ships, form a defensive perimeter around the Retribution. Buy us time to analyze that data." The human fleet moved into position, their weapons charged and ready. The Iridian armada unleashed a storm of exotic weaponry, graviton pulses and dark matter torpedoes ripping through human shields like tissue paper. On the bridge of the Tees Challenger, Captain Marcus Ironside Grant gripped the armrests of his command chair. As the deck shuddered beneath him, consoles exploded in showers of sparks, filling the air with acrid smoke. "Damage report!" Grant barked. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, the tactical officer replied, his voice tight with tension. "Armor integrity down to 23%. Another barrage slammed into the Challenger, the force of the impact throwing crewmen from their seats. Grant hauled himself upright, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "Reroute all power to forward shield," he ordered. "Divert emergency crews to seal those breaches." He made a split-second decision. "Overload the reactor core. Set collision course with that dreadnought." His crew hesitated, their faces etched with fear and disbelief. Grant met their eyes, his voice steady. "It's been an honor serving with you. Now let's give these bastards a hell of a send-off." With grim determination, they carried out his final order. The Challenger's engines roared to life, propelling the stricken ship forward. The dreadnought filled the viewscreen, growing larger with each passing second. Grant closed his eyes, a smile playing across his lips. "See you on the other side," he whispered. The Challenger slammed into the dreadnought, its reactor core detonating in a blinding flash of light. The explosion engulfed both ships, vaporizing metal and flesh alike. The shockwave rippled outward, shattering the Iridian formation. On the Retribution's bridge, Simpson watched the fireball dissipate, a lump in his throat. Grant's sacrifice had bought them a precious opening, and he wouldn't let it go to waste. "Helm full speed ahead," he commanded. "Bring the phase cannon to bear." The Retribution surged forward, its engine straining as it plowed through the debris field. The phase cannon hummed with power, its barrel glowing a brilliant blue. Across the battlefield, Thompson wrestled with the controls of his fighter. sweat pouring down his face as he dodged and weaved through the Iridian flagship's point defenses. Alarms blared in the cockpit, warning of imminent shield failure. With a defiant yell, Thompson fired a volley of quantum torpedoes at the flagship's power core. The projectiles found their mark, puncturing the core's containment field. The flagship shuddered, explosions blossoming across its hull as the core went critical. Thompson yanked hard on the flight stick, pulling his fighter into a steep climb as the flagship lost control. Careening into the ranks of its own fleet, Iridian ships scattered, their formation disintegrating into chaos. On the Retribution, Russo and Novak worked feverishly to decipher the Resolute's data, sweat beading on their brows as their fingers flew across the console. The schematic flickered on the screen, tantalizing fragments of information coming together like pieces of a puzzle. "There!" Novak exclaimed, pointing to a pulsing node in the center of the diagram. "That's the key. If we can hit that exact frequency—" Russo nodded, his eyes widening with realization. "It'll trigger a cascade failure in their shields. We can punch right through." He turned to the weapons officer, his voice ringing with authority. "Lock onto that frequency. Divert all power to the phase cannon." The Retribution shuddered as the cannon absorbed the ship's energy, its frame groaning under the strain. The barrel pulsed with blinding light, tendrils of energy crackling along its length. Simpson leaned forward, his cybernetic eye reflecting the glow of the viewscreen. The Iridian fleet loomed before them, still reeling from the loss of their flagship. He drew a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. A triumphant roar erupted on the Retribution's bridge as Russo and Novak burst in, their faces flushed with excitement. "We've got it, Captain! The key to the Iridian shields!" Novak stepped forward, a data pad clutched in her hands. "There's a weakness in their shield harmonics, a vulnerability we can exploit. If we broadcast this patch to the fleet, our weapons will slice through their defenses like a hot knife through butter." Simpson didn't hesitate. "Do it. Transmit the patch to all ships now." Russo's fingers danced across the console, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Patch transmitted. All ships stand by to engage." Across the battlefield, the human fleet responded, their weapon systems recalibrating to the new frequency. And then, as one, they opened fire. The effect was immediate and devastating. Plasma rounds and torpedoes tore through the Iridian shields, ripping into their hulls with savage fury. Explosions blossomed across the alien fleet, shattered debris spinning into the void. On the bridge of the TS Victorious, Captain Nora Holloway grinned fiercely as her ship darted through the enemy formations, her weapons leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. "Target their power cores, don't let up!" The Victorious cannons roared, each shot finding its mark with unerring precision. Iridian ships crumpled under the onslaught, their once mighty vessels reduced to burning husks. In the heart of the enemy fleet, Commander Sato and her Marines launched their daring assault, leaping from the crippled dreadnought onto the hulls of the surrounding ships. Mag boots clanging against metal, they raced across the alien vessels, planting explosive charges as they went. Sato's voice crackled over the comm, steady and determined. "Charges set, all units clear the blast radius." The Marines leaped back into the void, their thrusters flaring as they propelled themselves away from the doomed ships. Moments later, the charges detonated, the blasts rippling through the Iridian fleet like a chain of supernovas. Ships spun out of control, their hulls ruptured and venting atmosphere. Others, their power cores breached, simply vanished in blinding flashes of light. The once formidable Iridian armada was in chaos, their formation shattered, their ships crippled and adrift. On the Retribution's bridge, Simpson watched the carnage unfold, his heart pounding with a fierce primal joy. They were winning. After so much loss, so much sacrifice, they were finally turning the tide. But there was still one more target, one more blow to strike. Simpson turned to the weapons officer, his voice ringing with command. "Lock phase cannon on the Iridian flagship. Divert all power to the main gun." The officer nodded, his hands flying over the controls. "Phase cannon locked and charging, sir." Simpson leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the view screen. The Iridian flagship loomed before them, its shields flickering weakly, its hull pockmarked with scars. He drew a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. The phase cannon pulsed, a blinding lance of energy erupting from the Retribution's prow. It struck the flagship's shields, the barrier shattering like glass under the onslaught. The beam tore into the ship's hull, ripping through deck after deck, leaving utter devastation in its wake. Secondary explosions burst across the flagship's surface, the once mighty vessel shuddering and buckling as its systems failed. Escape pods and shuttles spilled from its hangar bays, the Iridian crew abandoning ship in a desperate bid for survival. And then, with a final shuddering groan, the flagship's reactor went critical. The ship vanished in a blinding flash of light, a miniature sun blooming in the heart of the battlefield. The shockwaves slammed into the surrounding vessels, sending them tumbling end over end. Their crews tossed about like ragdolls. On the Retribution's bridge, the crew erupted in cheers, their voices ringing with triumph and relief. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck a blow that would echo through the ages, a blow that would redefine the balance of power in the galaxy. But Simpson knew that the battle was far from over. The Iridians were beaten but not broken. They would regroup, rearm, and return, driven by a thirst for vengeance that could never be quenched. And when they did, the Retribution would be waiting, ready to fight to the last, ready to defend humanity's place among the stars. Simpson rose from his chair, his voice ringing out across the bridge. "All ships, regroup and reload. We've won the battle, but the war is just beginning. Stand ready, for we have—" As the shattered remnants of the Iridian command ship spun through the void, Supreme Commander Altair slammed his fist on the armrest of his command chair. Sparks flew from shattered consoles, and acrid smoke filled the air, but Altair's eyes blazed with defiance. "Concentrate all fire on the human colony world," he roared. "Make them pay for this insult." The remaining Iridian ships, their hulls scarred and their shields flickering, turned their weapons on the defenseless planet. Energy beams of devastating power lanced out, cutting through the atmosphere and slamming into the surface. Cities crumbled and burned under the onslaught, the screams of the dying echoing through the void. On the bridge of the Retribution, Simpson watched in horror as the colony world burned. He knew he had to act fast, but the choice tore at him. Pursue the fleeing Iridians and risk countless civilian lives, or defend the colony and allow the enemy to escape. He made the call. "All ships move to intercept the Iridian attack," he barked. "Retribution Strike Force, continue the assault on the enemy fleet. We can't let them regroup." The human fleet split in two, the bulk of the ships racing towards the besieged colony, while the Retribution and its escorts pressed the attack on the Iridians. Engines flared and weapons charged as the strike force closed in, determined to end the Iridian threat once and for all. Thompson's fighters darted ahead, weaving through the enemy formations with reckless abandon. Their weapons, now able to pierce the Iridian shields, tore into the enemy ships with ruthless precision. Hulls buckled and exploded under the onslaught, the once mighty Iridian vessels reduced to drifting wrecks. Sato and her marines, still clad in their EVA suits, leaped from the crippled Iridian dreadnought onto the hull of a nearby cruiser. They moved with grim purpose, planting explosive charges at key structural points. The cruiser shuddered and lurched as the charges detonated, its hull splitting open like a ripe fruit. The Retribution itself plunged into the heart of the enemy fleet, its phase cannon blazing with destructive energy. The beam sliced through Iridian ships like a scythe through wheat, leaving a trail of shattered hulks in its wake. The Iridians, their morale shattered, and their ships in ruins, began to flee, their weapons falling silent as they desperately sought to escape the human onslaught. Altair, his flagship crippled and his crew on the verge of mutiny, stared at the tactical display with a mix of rage and despair. The human fleet had outmaneuvered and outfought him at every turn, their victory now all but assured. With a final, bitter curse, he gave the order to surrender, his voice thick with defeat. Cheers erupted throughout the human fleet as the Iridian ships powered down their weapons and raised the white flag of surrender. It was a moment of triumph, a victory that would be remembered for generations. But even as the celebrations began, Simpson couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Iridians had been beaten, but not broken. They would return seeking vengeance for this humiliation, and when they did, the humans would need to be ready. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. On the bridge of the Retribution, Simpson stood at the viewport, watching as the last of the Iridian ships limped away into the darkness. His cybernetic eye glinted in the starlight, a reminder of the sacrifices he and so many others had made to reach this point. He turned to his crew, his voice filled with a mix of pride and grim determination. "We've won a great victory today," he said, "but we cannot rest on our laurels. The Iridians will be back and we must be ready to face them. We must rebuild, rearm, and prepare for the battles to come. For the sake of our species, for the sake of our children, we must remain vigilant." He looked out at the stars once more, his mind already racing with plans and strategies for the future. The war may have entered a new phase, but the fight was far from finished, and as long as he drew breath, Captain Brian Simpson would be there to lead the charge, to defend humanity against all who would threaten it. The crew of the Retribution, battered but unbroken, set to work, repairing damage and tending to the wounded. There was much to be done, but they would face the challenges ahead with the same courage and determination that had brought them this far, for they were human and they would never surrender, never back down in the face of adversity. The stars watched in silence as the Retribution and its fleet sailed on, a beacon of hope in a galaxy torn by war. The road ahead would be long and hard, but with heroes like Simpson and his crew leading the way, humanity would endure no matter the cost. As the acrid smoke of battle dissipated, the human fleet began the grim task of assessing the damage. Medics rushed through the corridors of the battered ships, triaging the wounded and comforting the dying. In the hangar bays, technicians worked feverishly to repair the scorched and dented hulls, their faces grim with exhaustion. On the bridge of the Retribution, Simpson stood before the flickering tactical display, his eyes hollow with fatigue. He watched as the casualty reports scrolled across the screen, the names of the dead and wounded blurring together in an endless litany of loss. Suddenly a priority message flashed on the screen, its urgency undeniable. Simpson's eyes widened as he read the contents, his heart sinking with each word. The Iridians, in a final, desperate act of cruelty, had unleashed a devastating biological weapon upon the human colony below. Confirmed reports of a highly virulent pathogen spreading rapidly through the population, the message read. Mortality rate approaching 100%. Recommend immediate quarantine protocols. Simpson slammed his fist against the console, his voice raw with anguish. Damn them! Damn those scaly bastards to hell! He turned to his communications officer, his face etched with grim determination. Get me a secure channel to the colony. We need to... His words trailed off as a new report flashed on the screen. Sir, we have multiple confirmed cases of the virus on the ships that participated in the rescue operation. It's spreading fast. Simpson felt a cold dread grip his heart. The Iridians had dealt a crippling blow even in defeat. The virus, engineered to be fast-acting and lethal, would rip through the fleet like wildfire. He closed his eyes, his mind racing with the terrible implications. To prevent the spread of the virus to other human worlds, he would have to make an unthinkable choice. With a heavy heart, he gave the order. Initiate Quarantine Protocol Alpha 1. No ships are to leave the system. All personnel are to remain on board their vessels. Anyone showing symptoms of the virus is to be isolated immediately. The bridge crew looked at him in shock, their faces pale with fear. They knew what the order meant. The infected ships would become floating tombs, their crews condemned to a slow and agonizing death. As the news of the quarantine spread through the fleet, morale plummeted. The once triumphant warriors now huddled in their quarters, their minds haunted by the spectre of the virus. Some wept openly, while others raged against the cruel twist of fate that had snatched victory from their grasp. Simpson, his spirit broken by the suffering he had witnessed, knew that he could no longer lead the fleet. The weight of his decisions, the lives he had condemned, pressed down upon him like a physical burden. In a somber ceremony, he handed over command of the Retribution to his first officer, Commander Olivia Prescott. Her face was ashen as she accepted the heavy mantle of leadership, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," Simpson whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm so sorry." As he departed the fleet, a shuttle carrying him towards an uncertain future, a sense of despair settled over the survivors. They had won the battle, but at a terrible cost. The Iridians had proven themselves to be a cruel and ruthless enemy, willing to use any means necessary to destroy humanity. The once mighty warships, now battered and scarred, drifted in the void like wounded beasts. Their hulls bore the scars of countless battles, their crews haunted by the ghosts of the fallen. They stood as silent sentinels over the ruins of the colony, a grim reminder of the price of victory and the challenges that lay ahead. In the medical bays, the screams of the infected echoed through the corridors. Medics clad in isolation suits worked tirelessly to ease their suffering, but the virus was relentless. The air was thick with the stench of death and despair. On the bridge of the Retribution, Commander Prescott stared out at the stars, her face etched with determination. She knew that the road ahead would be long and hard, that the Iridians would not rest until humanity was wiped from the face of the galaxy. But she also knew that the human spirit was indomitable, that even in the darkest of times, hope could still flicker to life. The Iridians had struck a devastating blow, but humanity would rise again, stronger and more determined than ever. The once broken fleet would heal, would rearm and rebuild, and when the time came they would take the fight to the enemy, would make them pay for every life lost, every world burned. The war was far from over, but the humans would not rest until the Iridians were nothing more than a bitter memory, a cautionary tale of the price of underestimating the strength and resilience of the human race. Prescott turned to her crew, her voice ringing with conviction. "We've suffered a terrible blow, but we're not beaten yet. We'll mourn our dead, we'll heal our wounded, and then we'll make those bastards pay. We'll show them what it means to be human." The crew nodded, their faces grim with determination. They knew the road ahead would be hard, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the ruins of the colony below, a single flower bloomed amidst the rubble, a fragile symbol of hope in a shattered world. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, life could still find a way to persevere, to endure. And so the human fleet set out once more, battered but unbroken, ready to face the long and bloody road ahead. They had lost much, but they would not lose hope. They would fight on, no matter the cost, until the Iridian threat was nothing more than a bitter... As the human fleet reeled from the aftermath of the Iridian bioweapon attack, a new threat emerged from within. Colonel Victor Kessler, a former military intelligence officer with a troubled past, began to gather a following among the traumatized survivors. His message was one of hate and revenge, calling for the complete annihilation of the Iridian race. Commander Prescott watched with growing concern as Kessler's influence spread like a cancer through the fleet. She called a meeting of the senior officers, her face grave as she addressed them. "We cannot allow Kessler's message of hate to take root," she said, her voice firm. "We must focus on rebuilding, on healing. Vengeance will only lead to more suffering." But Kessler's faction continued to grow, his followers becoming more violent and extreme with each passing day. They targeted not only Iridians, but any humans who dared to oppose their agenda. Prescott knew she had to act before it was too late. She confronted Kessler on the bridge of the Retribution, her eyes blazing with anger. "This ends now, Colonel. Your hate will destroy us all." Kessler sneered, his face twisted with malice. "You're weak, Prescott. You don't have the stomach for what needs to be done." Suddenly the doors to the bridge burst open, and a group of Iridian soldiers stormed in, led by none other than Supreme Commander Altair himself. Prescott's eyes widened in shock as she realized the truth. Kessler had been working with the Iridians all along. "You traitor," she spat, drawing her weapon. Altair laughed, his voice cold and cruel. You humans are so predictable. Divide and conquer, it's the oldest trick in the book. A brutal battle erupted on the bridge. Prescott and her loyal crew members fighting desperately against Kessler's followers and their Iridian allies. Plasma bolts and bullets flew, consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and bodies hit the deck with sickening thuds. In the chaos, Prescott found herself face to face with Kessler, their weapons locked in a deadly embrace. They grappled, each trying to gain the upper hand, until finally Prescott managed to drive her blade deep into Kessler's chest. The traitor's eyes widened in shock and pain, and he slumped to the ground, blood pooling around him. But the victory was short-lived. Prescott looked down to see a plasma bolt wound in her own side, the flesh seared and blackened. She stumbled, her vision blurring, as the last of the Iridian soldiers were cut down by her crew. The Retribution was a shattered hulk, its systems failing and its crew decimated. Prescott dragged herself to the communications console, her blood-slick fingers fumbling with the controls. With her last ounce of strength, she recorded a final message to the surviving human colonies, warning them of the dangers of hate and division. "We must stand together," she rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "Only in unity can we hope to survive." As the life support systems failed, and the ship drifted into the void, the surviving crew members huddled together in the darkness, their fate uncertain. The war with the Iridians was over, but at a terrible cost. The scars it had left on the human race would endure for generations. The once mighty warships, now little more than ghosts, drifted through the void, haunting reminders of the price of survival in a hostile universe. On the ruined bridge of the Retribution, Prescott's body lay still, her sightless eyes staring up at the stars. Her sacrifice would not be forgotten, but whether her message would be heeded remained to be seen. In the depths of space, a lone Iridian ship limped away from the battlefield, its hull scorched and battered. In the dimly lit command center, a figure stirred, its eyes glinting in the darkness. Supreme Commander Altair, badly wounded but alive, dragged himself to the communications array. "This is not over," he snarled, his voice thick with pain and rage. "The human scourge will be eradicated no matter the cost. I swear it on the graves of my ancestors." You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.